Blood splattered across the weathered floorboards of the Nogales saloon as Victoria Grayson watched the man who had promised her everything crumple to the ground, shot dead by a rival for a gambling debt he'd never mentioned. The year was 1882, and at 23 years old, she had just learned the harshest lesson the Arizona Territory had to offer. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Victoria stood frozen, the pearl-handled derringer her father had given her still clutched in her trembling hand. She hadn't fired it hadn't needed to. Bradley Wilkes had fallen before she could even consider defending him, the man who'd sworn to marry her once they reached California. The man who, she'd just discovered, had a wife in 3 different territories. "Miss, you'd best come with me," the town sheriff said, gently taking the small gun from her fingers. "This ain't no place for a lady, especially not with what's about to happen." He was right. Within moments, the saloon erupted into chaos, chairs overturned, bottles smashed, and men settling old scores with fists and bullets alike. The sheriff guided her out the back door just as the brawl consumed what remained of the establishment's fragile order. That was how Victoria Grayson found herself stranded in Nogales, Arizona, with nothing but a small trunk of belongings, $20 sewn into her petticoat, and a heart that felt like it had been trampled by a stampede. 3 years later, Victoria had built a modest life for herself. The millinery shop she managed for Mrs. Henderson provided enough income for a small room above the general store and occasional indulgences like sugar candy or a new ribbon. She'd earned respect in town for her honest work and quiet demeanor, though few would call her friendly. Victoria kept to herself, declining invitations to socials and avoiding the attentions of the single men who passed through. "Morning, Miss Victoria," called Elmer Jenkins, sweeping the boardwalk in front of his hardware store. Victoria nodded politely but continued walking briskly toward her shop, her gaze fixed forward. She had learned that even small talk could lead to dangerous territory, to questions about her past, or worse, to someone getting ideas about her future. The less she engaged, the safer she remained. As she approached the millinery, she noticed a horse she didn't recognize tied at the hitching post, a magnificent palomino with a dark leather saddle that had clearly seen many miles but was meticulously maintained. Her steps slowed as she pushed open the door, the small bell announcing her arrival. Mrs. Henderson was chatting animatedly with a tall stranger whose broad shoulders seemed to fill the small shop. When he turned at the sound of the bell, Victoria found herself facing the most striking blue eyes she'd ever encountered. "Ah, Victoria, just in time," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "This is Mr. Victor Daniels. He's bought the old McCready Ranch outside town and needs some assistance with household items." The man removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss Grayson," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "pleasure to meet you. Mrs. Henderson speaks highly of your taste and judgment." Victoria gave a tight smile and moved behind the counter, creating a physical barrier between herself and the newcomer. "How may I help you, Mr. Daniels? My sister is arriving from Boston in 2 weeks. I'm afraid the ranch house is in no condition to welcome a lady. Mrs. Henderson suggested you might advise on proper furnishings for the parlor." Victoria relaxed slightly at the mention of a sister. "Just business, then. I'd be happy to make recommendations. Is your sister married, sir?" "Widowed," he replied, a shadow crossing his features. "The war took her husband 5 years back. She's finally agreed to join me out west for a fresh start." Victoria nodded, understanding all too well the appeal of beginning anew. "I can prepare some sketches and fabric samples if you'd like to return tomorrow." "Much obliged," he said, placing his hat back on his head. He paused at the door. "My friends call me Vic, Miss Grayson." "Good day, Mr. Daniels," she replied pointedly, turning her attention to a display of ribbons that needed straightening. She heard his low chuckle as he left, the bell tinkling cheerfully behind him. Mrs. Henderson clucked her tongue. "That man is certainly easy on the eyes, Victoria. And a ranch owner, too, quite a catch." "I'm not fishing, Mrs. Henderson," Victoria responded with the practiced patience of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. 3 years is a long time to be alone, dear." Victoria's hands stilled on the ribbons. Not nearly long enough to forget some lessons. Mrs. Henderson sighed but knew better than to press further. The story of what happened at the saloon had circulated through Nogales within hours, growing more dramatic with each telling. By the time Victoria had emerged from her room at the boarding house the next day, half the town believed she'd been engaged to a notorious outlaw, while the other half thought she was on the run from one. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Bradley Wilkes hadn't been an outlaw, just a charming liar, who'd convinced her to leave her father's home in Missouri with promises of love and a new life in California. By the time they reached Arizona, her savings were gone, along with her reputation and any possibility of returning to her previous life. Then a bullet had ended his deceptions, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her poor judgment. The following morning, Victoria arrived at the shop to find Victor Daniels already waiting outside, his hat in his hands and that magnificent horse standing patiently nearby. "You're early, Mr. Daniels," she observed, unlocking the door, early riser. "Comes with ranch life," he replied, following her inside. "I brought measurements of the parlor and dining room." She accepted the neatly written notes, surprised by his thoroughness. "This is helpful. Your sister is fortunate to have such a considerate brother. Charlotte deserves a proper home after what she's been through." His voice carried a weight of shared history. "War changes everything, Miss Grayson, even those left behind." Victoria nodded, uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "Let me show you the fabric samples I've selected." For the next hour, they discussed curtains, upholstery, and wallpaper, with Victoria maintaining a strictly professional demeanor despite Victor's occasional attempts at more personal conversation. When their business concluded, he lingered at the counter. "Would you consider coming to the ranch to see the spaces yourself? I fear my descriptions don't do them justice." "That wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Daniels." His expression remained earnest. "Mrs. Henderson could accompany you as chaperone. I'd send my wagon for you both." Victoria hesitated. The request was reasonable from a business perspective, and Mrs. Henderson would undoubtedly be thrilled by the outing. "Very well. Sunday afternoon, perhaps?" His smile brightened his entire face. "Sunday it is." As promised, Victor's wagon arrived promptly at 2 o'clock on Sunday. To Victoria's surprise, he drove it himself rather than sending a ranch hand. "Ladies," he greeted them, helping first Mrs. Henderson and then Victoria onto the seat. His hand was warm and calloused, the touch brief but enough to cause Victoria to stiffen. If he noticed, he gave no indication. The McCready Ranch, now the Daniels Ranch, was located 7 miles outside town, nestled in a valley with a clear creek running through it. As they approached, Victoria could see why Victor had purchased it. Despite its current state of disrepair, the setting was picturesque, with cottonwood trees providing shade and mountains creating a dramatic backdrop. "It's lovely," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "It will be," Victor corrected. "Right now, it's a work in progress." The main house was larger than Victoria had expected, built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Several ranch hands paused in their work to nod respectfully as Victor helped the women down from the wagon. "Welcome to Sunrise Ranch," he said, leading them up the steps. "Sunrise?" Mrs. Henderson inquired. "My father always said that no matter how dark the night, the sunrise reminds us we get another chance." Seemed fitting. His eyes met Victoria's briefly before he turned to open the door. The interior of the house was indeed in need of attention, though Victoria could see the good bones beneath the neglect. High ceilings, large windows, and solid woodwork spoke of quality craftsmanship from an earlier era. The previous owner was a widower who lived here alone for 15 years, Victor explained. "I'm afraid housekeeping wasn't his priority." Victoria moved through the parlor, mentally placing furniture and envisioning the space restored to its potential. "The fireplace is magnificent," she noted, running her hand along the stone mantel. "It just needs a thorough cleaning." "That's what I thought too," Victor agreed, standing close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "You have a good eye, Miss Grayson." Mrs. Henderson wandered toward the dining room, leaving them momentarily alone. Victoria immediately stepped away, maintaining a proper distance. "When does your sister arrive?" she asked. "2 weeks from Tuesday. The stage brings her as far as Tucson, and I'll collect her there." Victoria nodded. "We should be able to have curtains and basic furnishings in place by then, though some items may need to be ordered from catalogs." He studied her face. "You're very efficient, Miss Grayson." "I try to be, Mr. Daniels." After touring the house, Victor insisted on showing them the small orchard behind the property where apple and peach trees were beginning to bloom. Mrs. Henderson exclaimed over the beauty, while Victoria remained quieter, cataloging the work that would transform the neglected garden into something truly special. "Would you ladies care for some refreshment before heading back?" Victor asked. Inside the kitchen, he surprised Victoria by competently preparing coffee and setting out a plate of cookies that he admitted sheepishly had been purchased from the bakery in town. "I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited," he confessed. "Another reason Charlotte's arrival will be welcome." Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Or perhaps you need a wife, Mr. Daniels." Victoria shot her employer a warning look, but Victor merely smiled. "In due time, perhaps, when the right woman is ready." His eyes met Victoria's across the table, and she quickly looked away, focusing intently on her coffee cup. On the ride back to town, Mrs. Henderson chatted happily about the ranch's potential while Victoria remained lost in thought. There was something about Victor Daniels that unsettled her, not in the way Bradley had eventually done with his increasingly obvious lies, but in how genuine he seemed. Genuine people were, in her experience, the most dangerous kind. They made you believe in possibilities, and Victoria Grayson had sworn off possibilities the day she watched Bradley Wilkes die on a saloon floor. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor became a regular presence at the millinery shop, checking on orders and bringing measurements for additional rooms as his sister's arrival approached. Despite Victoria's best efforts to maintain a professional distance, she found herself warming to his quiet humor and evident dedication to creating a comfortable home for Charlotte. "You've never mentioned your own family, Miss Grayson," he remarked one afternoon as she showed him wallpaper samples. Victoria's hands stilled. "There's little to tell. My mother died when I was young. My father remarried. We lost touch when I left Missouri." "I'm sorry to hear that." She shrugged, feigning indifference. "It was long ago. Family rifts can be mended," he suggested gently. "I didn't speak to my father for 2 years after he opposed my joining the army, regretted that silence after he passed." Victoria looked up, meeting his eyes. "Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, Mr. Daniels." "Perhaps, but sometimes we only believe they're destroyed when they're merely damaged." She changed the subject, pointing to a blue pattern. "This would complement the eastern exposure of your dining room nicely." If Victor was frustrated by her deflection, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully at her selection. Charlotte always did favor blue. The day before Charlotte's expected arrival, Victor invited Victoria and Mrs. Henderson to the ranch to see the transformation. The difference was remarkable. Clean windows allowed sunlight to stream across newly polished floors. The furniture Victoria had selected a mix of pieces from Nogales' only furniture shop, and items ordered from Tucson created inviting spaces throughout the main rooms. "You've worked magic," Victor said, watching Victoria adjust the parlor curtains. "Hardly magic, just attention to detail. A skill I admire greatly." He moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the ranch yard where men were completing final preparations. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Grayson." Victoria tensed immediately, taking a step back. Victor noticed and held up his hands. "A business proposition," he clarified. "Charlotte knows nothing about running a household in the West. I'd like to hire you to visit weekly, at least initially, to help her adjust and perhaps teach her what you know about managing in this environment. I have responsibilities at Mrs. Henderson's shop. I've already discussed it with her. She's agreeable to sparing you 1 day a week." Victoria frowned, annoyed at this planning behind her back. "And if I'm not agreeable, then of course the matter is closed," he said simply. "I would never press where I'm not welcome." His easy acceptance of her potential refusal disarmed her. Bradley would have cajoled, flattered, and manipulated until she yielded. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And now, would you ladies join me for dinner? My housekeeper, Mrs. Flores, has prepared a meal to test the new dining room." Mrs. Henderson eagerly accepted while Victoria hesitated before reluctantly agreeing. The meal was pleasant enough, with Mrs. Flores's excellent cooking and Victor's stories of ranch life keeping the conversation flowing. Victoria found herself laughing despite her reservations when he described his first disastrous attempt at breaking a particularly stubborn horse. "I landed in a water trough with my dignity in tatters, and my foreman trying desperately not to laugh," he concluded with a self-deprecating smile. "Did you eventually break the horse?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "No," Victor admitted. "Some creatures simply can't be broken, nor should they be. That mare now runs free with the wild herd in the North Valley. I visit sometimes to remind myself that there's value in respecting another being's boundaries." His eyes met Victoria's, and she felt a curious warmth spread through her chest one she quickly suppressed. Charlotte Daniels arrived as scheduled, and Victoria was surprised to discover she liked the woman immediately. In her mid-30s, Charlotte possessed her brother's blue eyes and direct manner, though grief had left its mark in the fine lines around her mouth and the occasional distance in her gaze. "Victor tells me I owe the comfort of my new home to your excellent taste, Miss Grayson," Charlotte said during their first meeting. "Your brother knew what he wanted. I merely helped realize his vision." Charlotte smiled. "My brother is a determined man when he sets his mind to something or someone." Victoria chose to ignore the implication. "He mentioned you might appreciate some guidance on Western household management." "Indeed, I would. Boston didn't prepare me for the realities of dust that gets into everything and the challenges of preserving food in this heat." Thus began Victoria's weekly visits to Sunrise Ranch. Each Wednesday, Victor would send a wagon for her, and she would spend the day with Charlotte, teaching her everything from how to manage Mexican servants with respect and clear communication, not condescension, to how to keep scorpions out of the house, lavender sachets, and vigilant sweeping. To her surprise, Victoria found herself looking forward to these visits. Charlotte was intelligent and eager to learn, and there was a peacefulness to the ranch that soothed something in Victoria's soul. If Victor was often present, finding reasons to join their conversations or invite them to see some new improvement to the property, she told herself it was natural for a brother to take interest in his sister's adjustment. Summer arrived with blazing heat that shimmered across the landscape. One Wednesday in July, Victoria and Charlotte were reviewing recipes for preserving fruit from the orchard when Victor appeared in the doorway, his shirt darkened with sweat from morning work. "Ladies," he greeted them, "I thought you might enjoy a respite from the heat. The swimming hole in the creek is particularly inviting today." Charlotte brightened immediately. "What a marvelous idea. I'll fetch my bathing costume." Victoria shook her head. "I'm afraid I didn't bring anything suitable for swimming." "Charlotte can lend you something," Victor suggested. "I couldn't possibly." "Oh, but you must," Charlotte insisted. "It's simply too hot to refuse. Besides, I've been wanting to show you my favorite spot on the property." Reluctantly, Victoria found herself changing into a borrowed bathing costume in Charlotte's room, while the other woman chattered excitedly about the cooling properties of the creek. The swimming hole was indeed beautiful, a deep, clear pool created by a natural rock formation in the creek bed, shaded by cottonwood trees that dappled the surface with shifting patterns of sunlight. Victor had tactfully disappeared after showing them to the spot, leaving the women to enjoy their swim privately. In the water, Victoria felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years. She floated on her back, staring up at the blue Arizona sky through the leaves, letting the current gently move her body. "You're smiling," Charlotte observed, swimming beside her. "It suits you." Victoria realized she was right. "The water feels wonderful." "It's not just the water," Charlotte said knowingly. "It's allowing yourself a moment of joy without questioning whether you deserve it." Victoria stood in the waist-deep water, surprised by the perceptiveness of the comment. "You sound like you speak from experience." Charlotte nodded, her expression growing serious. After James died, I believed happiness was something I had no right to feel. Grief became a kind of fortress, painful but safe in its familiarity. What changed? Victoria asked softly. Time. And eventually understanding that living half a life was its own kind of betrayal of James, but more importantly, of myself. Charlotte splashed water playfully, and having a brother who refused to let me hide away forever. Later, as they walked back to the house along a path bordered by wildflowers, Victoria spotted Victor in the distance, working with a young colt in the corral. He moved with confident grace, his gestures calm and reassuring as he guided the nervous animal. "He's good with frightened creatures," Charlotte commented, following Victoria's gaze. "Always has been. Our father believed in breaking spirits to control them. Victor learned a different approach. Patience instead of force," Victoria murmured. "Yes," Charlotte gave her a sidelong glance. "He's applied that philosophy to many aspects of his life." Victoria felt her cheeks warm and quickened her pace toward the house, unwilling to examine why Charlotte's observation unsettled her so deeply. That evening, as Victoria prepared to return to town, Victor approached her on the porch where she waited for the wagon. "I hope you enjoyed your afternoon," he said. "It was refreshing," she admitted. "Your sister is good company. She says the same of you." He leaned against the porch railing. "Charlotte also says you're the first real friend she's made since arriving." Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with both the compliment and his proximity. "She's been here barely a month. I'm sure she'll make many friends once she meets more people in town." "Perhaps, but some connections matter more than others." He straightened, taking a step toward her. "Miss Grayson, Victoria, I was wondering if you might—" "The wagon's here," she interrupted quickly, seeing the ranch hand driving up the path. Relief and something like disappointment warred within her as she hurried down the steps. "Good evening, Mr. Daniels." "Victor," he corrected softly. "After all this time, I wish you would call me Victor." She paused, one foot on the wagon step. "Good evening, Victor." His smile stayed with her all the way back to town. As summer progressed into fall, Victoria found her defenses weakening despite her best efforts. Victor began escorting her personally to and from the ranch each Wednesday, claiming Charlotte insisted upon it for propriety's sake, though Victoria suspected it was the brother's idea. These journeys provided long stretches of conversation where she learned about his time in the army during the final years of the Civil War, his dreams for the ranch, and his quiet determination to create a place where both people and animals could thrive. In turn, she found herself sharing small pieces of her childhood in Missouri, her father's strict Presbyterian upbringing, her love of books that had been her escape. She never mentioned Bradley Wilkes, but sometimes she caught Victor watching her with a look that suggested he understood there were wounds she wasn't ready to reveal. One crisp October afternoon, they took a longer route back to town, Victor claiming he wanted to show her a particular vista. He stopped the wagon on a ridge overlooking the valley, the ranch visible in the distance and mountains rising majestically beyond. "This is where I first knew I would buy this land," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "Something about the way the light hits the valley at sunset spoke to me." They stood side by side, watching as the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," Victoria acknowledged. "Yes," he agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the view. Alarmed by the intensity in his gaze, Victoria took a step back. "We should continue to town. It will be dark soon." "Victoria," he said softly, "I've respected your boundaries for months now. I've never pushed or pried, but I think you know what I feel for you." Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. "Mr. Daniels, Victor, please don't. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he continued gently. "I'm just asking if there might someday be a chance." "There isn't," she said flatly, though her voice trembled. I don't." "You don't feel anything for me?" he finished, his expression carefully neutral. Victoria looked away. Lying had never come easily to her. "What I feel doesn't matter. I'm not suited for the kind of life you'd expect." "And what kind of life do you think I expect?" "Marriage, children." "A woman who believes in happy endings." She met his eyes directly. "I'm not that woman, Victor." I think you could be, he said quietly, if the right person proved worthy of your trust. You don't understand, then help me understand. He took a step toward her. Whatever happened in your past, Victoria, it doesn't define who you could be in the future. For a moment, she almost told him everything about Bradley's lies, about her own foolishness, about the shame that still burned whenever she remembered how easily she'd been deceived. Instead, she squared her shoulders. Please take me back to town. The ride back was silent, the easy companionship of earlier replaced by a tension that seemed to fill the space between them. When they reached the boarding house where Victoria now lived, Victor helped her down without a word, his touch impersonal. I won't send the wagon next Wednesday, he said finally. I understand if you wish to end your arrangement with Charlotte. The thought of not returning to the ranch, of not seeing Charlotte or him created an unexpected ache in Victoria's chest. That won't be necessary. I gave my word to help your sister adjust, he nodded once. Very well. Good night, Miss Grayson. The formality stung more than she cared to admit. True to his word, the following Wednesday brought a wagon driven by a ranch hand rather than Victor himself. When Victoria arrived at Sunrise Ranch, Charlotte greeted her with concerned eyes. He told me what happened, she said without preamble once they were alone in the kitchen. Victoria busied herself with the basket of mending she'd brought. There's nothing to tell. My brother cares deeply for you. Your brother doesn't know me. Charlotte sat beside her, taking the mending from her hands. He knows enough. He sees the goodness in you, the strength it took to build a life here alone. Victoria shook her head. He sees what he wants to see. Don't we all? Charlotte's voice was gentle. Victoria, whatever happened before you came to Nogales is not something I wish to discuss. Charlotte sighed. Very well, but know this Victor is the best man I've ever known, save perhaps my late husband. If you reject him because you truly don't care for him, that's your right, but if you're rejecting him because you're afraid… I'm not afraid, Victoria snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. I apologize, that was unkind. It was honest, Charlotte corrected, and honesty is where healing begins. They spent the rest of the day on household matters, neither mentioning Victor again. As Victoria prepared to leave, Charlotte embraced her warmly. He's in the north pasture, she whispered, in case you wish to speak with him before returning to town. Victoria hesitated, then shook her head. I have nothing to say that would make any difference. But as the wagon rolled away from the main house, Victoria found herself asking the driver to stop at the pasture fence. She wasn't sure what compelled her curiosity, perhaps, or some need to prove to herself that she could see Victor without feeling the confusing mixture of longing and fear that had plagued her since their conversation on the ridge. He was working with the same wild mare he'd told them about during dinner months ago, the one he'd refused to break. Victoria watched from a distance as he stood quietly in the middle of the pasture, holding an apple in his outstretched hand. The mare circled him warily, occasionally stopping to consider the offering before dancing away again. Victor never moved to chase her. He simply waited, patient and still, until gradually the mare's circles grew smaller, her stops longer. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she approached cautiously and stretched her neck to take the apple from his hand. The triumph on Victor's face as the mare allowed him to gently stroke her neck brought tears to Victoria's eyes. There was something in that quiet victory that spoke to her more profoundly than any words could have. She signaled the driver to continue to town, her mind in turmoil. For the next week, Victoria threw herself into work at the millinery, staying late to complete orders and taking inventory with meticulous attention. Mrs. Henderson watched with knowing eyes but said nothing, allowing Victoria the space to wrestle with whatever inner conflict had her so distracted. On Sunday, Victoria attended church as usual, sitting in her accustomed pew near the back. When the service ended, she was startled to find Charlotte waiting for her outside. I hope you don't mind my ambushing you, Charlotte said, falling into step beside her. I wanted to invite you to dinner today. Victor's cattle buyer from Kansas City is visiting, and I could use another woman's presence to balance the conversation. Victoria suspected this was a transparent attempt at matchmaking but found herself accepting nonetheless. I'll need to change my dress. Of course, the wagon will collect you in an hour. Dinner was less awkward than Victoria had feared. The cattle buyer, Mr. Harrington, was a jovial man whose stories of his travels kept the conversation flowing. Victor was polite but reserved toward Victoria, focusing his attention on business discussions with Harrington. Only once did their eyes meet across the table, when Harrington mentioned the difficulty of finding honest partners in the cattle trade. "Trust is the foundation of any worthwhile endeavor," Victor said, his gaze holding Victoria's for a moment before he turned back to Harrington. "Without it, there's no solid ground to build upon." After dinner, Charlotte cleverly maneuvered Mr. Harrington into the parlor to show him photographs of the prize bull Victor was considering selling, leaving Victor and Victoria alone in the dining room. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. "Your sister isn't particularly subtle," Victoria finally said. A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips. "Subtlety has never been Charlotte's strong suit. The dinner was lovely, but you're ready to leave." It wasn't a question. Victoria studied her hands. "I don't know what I'm ready for anymore." Victor moved to stand beside her chair but didn't touch her. "May I tell you a story, Victoria?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I first returned from the war, I couldn't sleep indoors. The walls seemed to close in on me, filled with shadows of things I'd seen, men I'd lost. For a year, I slept under the stars, even in winter, because I was afraid of what waited for me in the darkness of a room." His voice was quiet, reflective. "My father thought I'd lost my mind. Perhaps I had a bit, but eventually I understood that the war wasn't in the room, it was in me, and staying outside wasn't keeping the memories at bay, it was letting them control where and how I could live." Victoria looked up at him. "How did you move beyond it, one night at a time?" "I built a small cabin with a skylight over the bed. I could see the stars but still had walls around me. Gradually, I reclaimed my ability to choose to not let fear dictate my life." He finally reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers. "Whatever happened to you, Victoria, it doesn't deserve the power to determine your future happiness." She drew a shaky breath. "There was a man. In another life, it seems, he lied. I believed him. It ended badly." The words came out staccato, each one difficult to voice. Victor's hand fully covered hers now, warm and steady. "I'm sorry. I was so foolish," she whispered. "You were human," he corrected gently. "We all want to believe in love, in possibilities. And I've spent 3 years making sure I never made the same mistake again." "Is that what this would be? The same mistake?" His blue eyes searched hers. "Victoria, I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking for the chance to earn your trust day by day for as long as it takes." She felt something inside her tremble, like ice beginning to crack in spring thaw. "And if it takes a very long time, then I'll wait," he said simply. "Some things are worth waiting for." Against her better judgment, Victoria found herself returning to Sunrise Ranch more frequently in the weeks that followed. She still came on Wednesdays to work with Charlotte, but now there were Sunday dinners as well, and occasional rides to view different parts of the ranch's expansive property. Victor was true to his word, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their conversations deepened, but he respected the boundaries she still maintained, never attempting physical closeness beyond occasionally taking her hand to help her from a wagon or steadying her on an uneven path. As November's chill settled over the land, Victoria realized with some surprise that she was happier than she had been in years. The fortress she had built around her heart still stood, but Victor had somehow found a gate she hadn't realized existed, one that allowed him to visit the outer courtyard without breaching the inner sanctum. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after Sunday dinner, Charlotte conveniently remembering household duties that required her attention inside, Victor asked the question Victoria had been dreading. "Will you tell me what happened? All of it, I mean." She stared out at the darkening landscape, weighing the risk of revealing the full extent of her foolishness against the growing certainty that Victor deserved to know whom he was waiting for. Slowly, haltingly, she told him everything about Bradley's charm and promises, about leaving her father's house against his wishes, about the gradual discovery of Bradley's debts and deceptions. And finally, about that terrible day in the saloon when everything had collapsed in blood and chaos. The sheriff later told me Bradley had wives in Texas and California, she concluded. I wasn't even the only one he'd deceived. Victor listened without interruption, his face grave but not judging. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Thank you for trusting me with your story, he finally said. Victoria looked at him searchingly. Doesn't it change how you see me, knowing how easily I was fooled? It changes nothing except my understanding of what you've overcome. He turned to face her fully. Victoria, we've all made mistakes in judgment. The question is whether we let those mistakes define us forever or use them to grow stronger and wiser. And you believe I've grown stronger. I believe you survived something that would have broken many people. You built a new life from nothing. You've earned respect through hard work and integrity. His voice softened. But I also believe you've denied yourself the chance to fully live that life because you're still punishing yourself for trusting the wrong man. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. Tears she had held back for years suddenly welled in her eyes. I was so afraid of being hurt again. Victor gently took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Fear is a necessary caution but a terrible guide. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, feeling something shift inside her as if a weight she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there had suddenly lightened. I don't know if I can be what you want, Victor. All I want is for you to be yourself, your true self, not the fortress you've built to protect her. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. The rest we can discover together. Winter brought cold rains and occasional dustings of snow to Nogales. The Christmas season approached, and Victoria found herself helping Charlotte decorate Sunrise Ranch for their first holiday in Arizona. Victor had invited Victoria's employer, Mrs. Henderson, and several neighboring ranchers for Christmas dinner, creating a gathering that would be festive without overwhelming Victoria's still cautious heart. On Christmas Eve, Victor surprised Victoria by appearing at her boarding house with a small gift and an invitation. Would you join me for a ride? He asked. There's something I'd like to show you before tomorrow's festivities. The something turned out to be a small cabin near the creek, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. What is this? Victoria asked as Victor helped her down from the wagon. A beginning, or perhaps a continuation. He led her to the door. I built it myself over the past month. Inside, the cabin was simple but beautifully crafted. A river stone fireplace dominated one wall while large windows captured views of both the creek and distant mountains. A small kitchen, a sitting area with comfortable chairs, and a separate bedroom completed the space. Victoria turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's lovely for a ranch hand. No, Victor stood in the center of the room, suddenly looking less certain than she had ever seen him. It's for you if you want it. For me, I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. I'm asking if you would consider living on the ranch. This cabin would be yours alone, your space, your sanctuary. I would court you properly with Charlotte as chaperone when needed, but you would have independence, a place of your own. Victoria's mind raced. What would people say? A single woman living on a bachelor's ranch. They would say that Victor Daniels finally convinced the most respected milliner in Nogales to become his ranch's housekeeper, with his widowed sister as companion. He smiled slightly. Charlotte's already spoken to Mrs. Henderson about the arrangement. She's willing to release you from the shop with her blessing. You've thought of everything, Victoria said, torn between annoyance at their planning and touched by the care they'd taken. I've tried to. His expression grew serious. Victoria, I love you. I believe I've loved you since that first day in the millinery when you so clearly wanted nothing to do with me. But I understand that love isn't enough without trust, and trust isn't something I can demand or rush. Victoria released her hands from his and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames as she gathered her thoughts. The cabin represented everything she had denied herself for so long, not just a relationship with Victor, but a chance to move forward, to believe in possibilities again. You said this is a beginning, she said finally, turning back to him. What does that mean exactly? Victor crossed to stand before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. It means whatever pace you set, whatever boundaries you need. It means I'll wait a month, a year, however long it takes for you to be ready. And if you're never ready for more than friendship, I'll accept that too. Victoria studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. She found only sincerity and that steady patience that had characterized his every interaction with her. "What if I'm already more ready than I thought I'd be?" she asked softly. Hope bloomed in his expression. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering with words, Victoria did something she hadn't done in over 3 years. She acted on instinct rather than fear. Rising on her toes, she placed her hands on his shoulders and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but when she pulled back, Victor looked at her with such wonder that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "I'm saying yes to the cabin," she clarified, a smile tugging at her lips. "And yes to possibilities." Victor's answering smile was radiant. "That's all I've ever asked for." As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, snowflakes began to fall, dusting Victoria's hair and cloak with delicate crystals. Victor reached across the wagon seat to take her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Merry Christmas, Victoria," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Victor." 2 years later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers carpeting the valleys around Sunrise Ranch, Victoria Grayson became Victoria Daniels in a ceremony performed on the porch of what was now their home. The small cabin by the creek remained, serving as a guest house and occasionally as a retreat when Victoria needed solitude to sketch designs for the successful dressmaking business she had established in a corner of the ranch house. Charlotte stood as Victoria's matron of honor, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down her face as her brother, and the woman who had become her dearest friend, exchanged vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Victor cupped Victoria's face in his hands with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "Thank you for being brave enough to try again," he whispered before kissing her. "Thank you for waiting until I was ready," she replied. As they turned to face their guests' friends from town, neighboring ranchers, and even Victoria's father, with whom she had cautiously reconciled through letters Victor had encouraged her to write, Victoria felt the last remnants of her fortress fall away, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. The certainty that love, when built on trust and patience, could heal even the deepest wounds. And as Victor took her hand to lead her to their wedding feast, Victoria knew that some journeys, though difficult and frightening, were worth every step.